I still remember that morning with absolute clarity, not because it was special, but because, for the first time in 23 years, I looked around and realized a truth I had spent my whole life avoiding. I had never belonged there. The alarm rang at exactly 5 a.m. A dry, cold sound echoed through the windowless basement room. I opened my eyes. Gray concrete ceiling. A damp, musty smell. The heater humming right beside my head. Everything, exactly the same as every other day. My body sat up automatically like a reflex carved into my bones. No thinking. No choosing. There was only one thing to do. Work. If you've ever lived a life where each day begins not with choice, but with obligation, comment 1. I walked up the stairs, each step so careful, it made almost no sound. I knew exactly which steps creaked, which ones to avoid. I had learned that when I was very young, because if he heard, it would no longer be a normal day. Woo. 13 a.m. I was already in the kitchen. The lights were still off, but I didn't need them. I knew everything here by heart. Every position, every drawer, every scratch on the marble countertop I cleaned every day. I turned on the stove. Eggs, bacon, coffee. I started cooking, not because I was hungry, but because I wasn't allowed to be hungry before them. T. Ada 1 a.m. He came downstairs. Thomas Caldwell. He didn't look at me. He never did. He sat in his usual chair, opened the newspaper as if he were the only person in the room. Is it done? His voice was flat, cold, empty. Yes, sir. He took a sip of coffee, paused. One beat. The coffee is weak. I stood still. Tomorrow fix it. That was it. That was the entirety of our conversations. For 23 years. I placed the plate down, stepped back. I wasn't allowed to sit, wasn't allowed to look too long, wasn't allowed to exist in their line of sight for too long. I ate after, always after, the leftovers, the parts they didn't want. But the thing that hurt the most wasn't the basement, wasn't the work, wasn't the endless repetition of mornings like this. It was what they called me. Not daughter, not Emily, but the girl, the help, the housekeeper. Not once did they call me family. If you've ever been somewhere you have a name, but no one uses it, comment 1. I thought that was normal, until I was 14. That night I did something I later understood was a mistake. I asked, "Can I sit and eat with you?" Silence filled the room. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then she laughed. A soft laugh, but sharp enough to cut. "Emily, the table only has 3 seats." I looked at the table. 6 chairs. I had counted them. Many times. But that night, for the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself otherwise. I didn't belong there. I never had. And the most terrifying part was, it took me 14 years to realize something so obvious. That night I went back to the basement, looked into the small cracked mirror on the wall. I looked at myself. My eyes didn't look like theirs. Deep blue. Almost green in the light. My hair wasn't like theirs. My skin. My face. Everything was different. I had asked once. Just once. And the slap I received was enough to make sure I never asked again. Don't ask stupid questions. That was all she said. And I believed her. I believed that some people are born to be loved, and some people are born to serve. I thought I was the second kind. I believed that for 23 years, until that day, the day I stood at a wedding. holding a tray of drinks, and a stranger looked at me like he had just seen a ghost. He walked closer, looked straight into my face, and asked a question that shattered my entire world. Do you know who your real mother is? I thought everything ended there. I was wrong. Because that question was only the beginning. I don't remember exactly when those rules first appeared. I only know they were always there, as if they had existed long before I was old enough to understand what they meant. A small card, thick paper, worn, taped to the inside of the basement door. It was the first thing I saw every morning, and the last thing I saw before going to sleep. Not a goodnight message, not a family photo, but rules. Rule number 1. Do not sit at the dining table with the family. Rule number 2. Do not call them father or mother. Rule number 3. Do not leave the house without permission. Rule number 4. Do not speak to strangers. Just 4 lines. Short, clear, but enough to control my entire life. At first, I didn't understand them. I thought it was just strict parenting, until I tried to break them. The first time, I was 7. I still remember that day. We had guests. A woman, Mrs. Caldwell, called her sister. I was told to bring tea to the living room. I did it right. Carefully. No spills. No noise. When I set the tray down, I looked at her. A natural reflex. A child looking for acknowledgement. Mum, I'm done. The room fell silent. Not a normal silence, but the kind where the air suddenly disappears. She didn't answer. She just looked at me. That look, I will never forget. Not angry. Not loud. Just cold. Completely cold. That night, he called me into the kitchen. No explanation. No warning. Just the cane hidden behind the cereal box. I don't remember how long I cried. I only remember that, after that night, I never called them parents again. Not because I understood the rule, but because I understood the consequence. But that wasn't the worst part. The moment that truly trapped me was the second time I was 16, and for the first time, I tried to leave. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't take it anymore. I had been saving money, every coin, change from groceries, coins dropped under the couch. I hid them in an old box under my bed. $17.32. That was everything I had. But at the time, it felt like a chance. A door. A hope. I walked 3 miles, carrying nothing but that money. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go, but I didn't get far. 2 hours later, the police brought me back. I still remember their eyes at the front door. She doesn't have any ID. No record. No documents. Is she yours? I stood behind them, heart pounding. A small piece of hope that this time, someone might see the truth. Then he stepped out. Thomas Caldwell. With a perfect smile. Warm. Convincing. She's our daughter. Troubled girl. Some mental issues. The door closed. The police left. And so did my hope. He locked the door. Didn't speak right away. Just stood there, looking at me, then dragged me to the basement. For 3 days, I wasn't allowed to eat, wasn't allowed outside, wasn't allowed to speak. No light. Just darkness and silence. When he finally opened the door, I barely had the strength to stand. He leaned down, his voice low, slow, each word deliberate. No documents. You don't exist. And if you don't exist, no one will believe you. No one will help you. A pause. Do you understand? I did. Not with logic, but with fear. Deep. Cold. Inescapable. After that, I never tried to leave again. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew I had nowhere to go. And no one would believe me. The strange thing is, not everyone in that house was cruel. There was one person who simply didn't care. Daniel Caldwell. He didn't hit me, didn't lock me up, didn't punish me. He just didn't see me. I need coffee. My room is a mess. The car is dirty. Those sentences, repeated every day. No name, no emotion, no awareness. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a function, a part of the house, like the stove or the washing machine. When you're not hated, but treated as if you don't exist, it hurts in a different way. Quieter, but deeper. And then, there was something I couldn't explain. Something I tried to ignore for years. I didn't look like them. Not just a feeling. But, obvious. They had brown eyes, light hair, pale skin. I didn't. My eyes were blue. Deep blue. Almost glowing under the light. My hair was darker. Thicker. Completely different. I asked once. And it was the last time. Don't ask stupid questions. That slap taught me something. There are questions you're not allowed to ask because if the question exists, the truth will follow. And the truth was something they never wanted me to touch. So I learned to stop asking, stop thinking, stop doubting. I told myself a story that some people are born to be loved and some people are born to serve. I was the second kind. Believing that helped me survive. At least, until things started to change. Not overnight. Not with one big event. But with a look. A stranger. A question. And a feeling. Small, but impossible to ignore. Something was wrong. And this time, I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. The news of Daniel's engagement didn't arrive with celebration. There was no family gathering, no moment where they called me upstairs to tell me. I found out the same way I learned everything else in that house. By accident. I was mopping the living room floor when I heard Mrs. Caldwell on the phone. The Whitmore family. Tens of millions in assets. This is a major step up. Her voice was different. Softer. Warmer. Like she was someone else entirely. I stood there, mop in hand. No one noticed I was listening. No one ever noticed. A few days later, the house began to change. Not in appearance, but in atmosphere. Everything became tighter, sharper, more perfect, as if the entire house was trying to become a better version of itself, to impress, to be accepted, to move into a higher world. He started talking more about connections, about opportunities, about how this marriage would change everything. She lived inside dress fittings, guest lists, phone calls that lasted for hours. And me, I worked. More. Earlier. Later. No one told me anything. But I knew my workload had doubled, then tripled. And there was no choice but to keep going. One evening while I was cleaning the kitchen, Daniel walked in. He didn't look at me. As usual, the wedding will be at the Ritz. He said it like he was speaking to the air. 200 guests. Don't mess it up. That was it. No explanation. No question. No need for a response. I nodded. Even though he wasn't looking, I always nodded. Even when no one saw, because that was how I existed there. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the work, but because of a thought, small, but persistent. If it was his wedding, then what was I? Family. Or just staff? The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks before the wedding, Mrs. Caldwell called me into the kitchen. Her voice was soft. Too soft. We need to talk about your role. Role. That word made my heart skip. A part of me, stupid, but still hopeful. Will I be part of the procession? I asked. Quiet. Careful. She laughed. Not warm, but the kind of laugh that makes you feel small. Emily, you'll be helping serve. Silence. Cold. Empty. You mean working? Not working. Helping. She adjusted my collar, like she cared. But her hands were cold. You know, you're not suitable to stand with them. You're clumsy, not refined. If you stand there, people will start asking questions. I said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because I was used to. Not reacting. You don't want to embarrass Daniel, do you? I shook my head. Reflex. Always reflex. She smiled. Satisfied. Like everything had been placed back where it belonged. That night the invitations arrived. Thick paper. Embossed lettering. Perfect. I stood in the kitchen and quietly looked at the guest list. His name. Her name. Daniel. The bride. Friends. Partners. Family. I searched. Again. And again. My name. Wasn't there. Not misspelled. Not forgotten. Just. Absent. If you've ever stood somewhere where everyone has a place, except you comment one or two, I was used to it. I had never accepted it. That night, I didn't go down to the basement right away. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the dining table. 6 chairs. Always 6. But never enough space for me. I wondered, if one day I disappeared, would anyone notice? Or would everything continue perfectly, just like it always had? But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was, I stayed. I kept preparing for that wedding. Pressed every outfit. Polished every glass. Organized every list. As if I belonged to it. When in reality, I was only standing outside. Until the night of the rehearsal dinner, when I put on a black dress, a white apron, and stepped into a room filled with light, not as family, but as staff. And that was the moment everything began to shift. Because for the first time, someone didn't look at me like I was invisible. He looked at me like he recognized something. Something I hadn't even dared to consider myself. I still remember the feeling of walking into that dinner that night, not because it was beautiful, but because I had never felt so small. Greenwich Country Club. Warm golden lights. Crystal glasses. Soft laughter controlled refined. Everything was perfect. Everything belonged to them. Not to me. I wore a simple black dress. A white apron. Hair tied neatly behind. No makeup. No accessories. Nothing that suggested I had any connection to that family. I carried a tray of wine, walking among people who were laughing, talking, People who never looked at me. No one asked who I was. No one needed to know, because in their eyes, I was just part of the service, like the table, the glassware, the music playing in the background. I was used to that. At least, I thought I was, until someone asked, "You're Daniel's sister, right?" I froze, just for a second, but enough for my heart to race. I turned. Victoria, the bride, standing right in front of me. Her eyes weren't cold, not judgmental, just curious. I hadn't answered yet. Another voice cut in. Fast, precisi, prepared. Emily prefers helping. Mrs. Caldwell, appearing beside me like a shadow, her hand resting lightly on my arm, as if it were natural, as if it were kind, but the pressure was enough for me to understand. She's quite shy, always more comfortable in the background. A perfect smile. Victoria nodded, but her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than usual. I turned away, kept walking, kept serving, as if that conversation had never happened. But inside, something had shifted. Not something big, just a small crack. In the story I had told myself for 23 years, that this was where I belonged, that this was my role, that everything made sense. And then, ifertit agaze, different from the others, not passing over me, not ignoring me, but stopping. I turned. Across the room, a man stood near the railing, a glass in his hand, not talking, not smiling, just watching me. Richard Whitmore, the bride's father. I don't know why, but when his eyes met mine, I felt like he was seeing through everything I tried to hide. Not my clothes, not my role, but who I really was. I turned away, faster than usual. But that feeling didn't disappear. It followed me through every step, every round I made across the room, every glass I handed out, until he walked toward me. "Excuse me." His voice was low, calm, but something was off. I turned back. "Yes. What's your name?" A simple question, but the way he asked it wasn't simple. "Emily." I answered, out of habit, the name I had lived with for 23 years. He repeated it, slowly, "Emily," as if testing the sound, as if it didn't fit. "Do you know who your real mother is?" The world around me stopped, not because people went silent, but because I couldn't hear anything anymore. Only that question echoing in my mind. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I had never been allowed to think about that question. If you were in my place at that moment, what would you do? Answer immediately. Walk away like you didn't hear it. Comment un ordeux? I chose not to answer. I just stood there, looking at him. He looked back, unblinking. A long silence stretched between us. Then he gave a slight nod, as if confirming something in his mind. "I'm sorry," he said, but his voice didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like adhésion. He turned away, quickly, pulled out his phone, walked outside. I stood there, still holding the tray, but I couldn't feel its weight anymore. Inside me, something had started to move. Not hope. Not yet. Just doubt. For the first time in 23 years, I began to consider a possibility. I had always avoided something. Wasn't right. And this time, I couldn't go back to the way things were. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of work. Not because I was tired. But because of that question. Do you know who your real mother is? I lay on the thin mattress in the basement, staring at the familiar concrete ceiling. But for the first time, it didn't feel the same. It was no longer a place I had accepted. It was a place I had been kept. I had always believed. My life might be bad, but at least it was real. But if that question was real, then everything I had believed for 23 years might have been a lie. I closed my eyes. But the more I tried not to think, the harder it became to stop. Why did he ask that? Why did that look feel like he knew me? Why did I feel afraid? Not afraid of him, but afraid of the answer. The next morning, everything continued, as if the night before had never happened. Lima A.M. The alarm rang. I got up, went to the kitchen, cooked, cleaned, repeated. But something was different. I started observing them, really observing. Not like before, just following orders. But watching, listening, remembering. He still read the newspaper. She still checked the guest list. Daniel still didn't look at me. Everything was still perfect. But for the first time, that perfection felt wrong. Like a beautiful painting, with one tiny detail out of place. And if you stare long enough, you can't ignore it anymore. The wedding morning came faster than I expected. Or 4 a.m. I was already awake. The house was quiet. No voices. No lights. Just me and work. I prepared breakfast. Set the table. Pressed the clothes. Everything had to be perfect. Not because they wanted it, but because they didn't tolerate mistakes. As I was steaming the wedding dress in the living room, Miss Caldwell stood in the doorway. Don't touch the beading. Her voice was soft, but sharp. That thing is worth more than you. I didn't respond. I was used to it. But this time, her words didn't pass through me. They stayed. Longer than usual. And that made me uncomfortable. You'll go through the back entrance, she continued. No one needs to see you coming in. I nodded. Like always. And don't embarrass us. A pause. I mean it. I nodded again. But this time, a question formed in my mind. If I don't exist, how can I embarrass them? That question stayed. It didn't go away. The ceremony was at the Ritz. Bigger. Brighter. More perfect than anything I had ever seen. I didn't go through the front entrance. I went through the service entrance. Picked up a tray. Took instructions. Champagne service. Keep moving. Don't talk. I nodded. And stepped inside. 200 people. Laughter. Lights. The scent of expensive perfume. I moved among them. Like a shadow. No one looked. No one asked. No one cared. Until I heard his voice. Make sure my table has extra shrimp. Daniel. He looked at me, but didn't see me. Of course, I answered. Out of habit. One of his friends glanced at me. Who is she? Daniel shrugged. Housekeeper. One word. But enough. Enough for something inside me to collapse just a little. Not because I was surprised, but because I realized he wasn't wrong. That was exactly what I was to them. Nothing more. Nothing less. I turned away. Kept walking. kept serving. But this time, I wasn't numb. I felt every glance that passed over me, every word not meant for me, every distance between me and them. And then I felt it again. That gaze. I turned. Richard Whitmore, standing a few meters away, not speaking, not smiling, just watching. But this time, it wasn't curiosity. It was certainty. He knew something. I didn't know how, but I was sure. He walked toward me. I prepared to leave, but he was faster. Brianna. I stopped. My heart skipped. No one had ever called me that. No one. Not here. I turned. Did you just call? He looked straight at me. No hesitation. Brianna. Not a question. A statement. A cold sensation ran down my spine. Not fear, but something else. For the first time, someone called me by a name that felt strangely familiar. You've got the wrong person. I said, but my voice wasn't steady. He didn't argue, didn't push. He just looked at me. For a long moment, then he said something that made everything inside me begin to crack. I've been looking for you for 23 years. The air around me disappeared. Only those words remained. 23 years. Exact. Perfectly aligned. Not a day off. I stepped back. Ons. Then again, my mind went blank. Not because I believed him, but because I couldn't deny it. If he was telling the truth, then everything I had lived for 23 years was not my life. It was a place I had been put into. And if that was true, then the next question would be, who am I really? I've been looking for you for 23 years. That sentence didn't fade. It didn't pass like everything else. It stayed inside my head, repeating, slow, heavy. 23 years. That number couldn't be a coincidence. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I did, I would have to admit there was a chance he was telling the truth. And I wasn't ready for that. I think you've made a mistake. I said, but my voice wasn't as steady as before. He didn't argue, didn't push. He just looked at me. Patient, but firm. I know this sounds impossible, he said quietly, but I need you to hear me. I shook my head. A reflex. Not because I didn't want to listen, but because I was afraid. If I listened, I wouldn't be able to go back to my old life. You don't have to believe me, he continued. Just verify it. He reached into his jacket, pulled out something small. A clear plastic tube. Simple. But in that moment, it felt like a doorway. Then a test. My heart started racing. Not because I fully understood it, but because I knew it could change everything. It only takes a few seconds, he said. And in 72 hours, you'll have your answer. 72 hours. 3 days. 3 days. To find out if my entire life had been a lie. I looked at the test. Didn't touch it. Didn't step back. Just stood there. Caught between two worlds. On one side, the life I knew. Painful. Wrong. But stable. On the other, a truth I didn't understand. Maybe better. Maybe far worse. Why me? I asked, very softly. But he heard it. He looked at me. This time, not hiding anything. I can't explain everything. Not yet. Because I need to be certain first. A pause. Then he added, "If I'm wrong, I'll disappear from your life. But if I'm right," he stopped, didn't finish. But I understood. If he was right, everything I knew would no longer exist. I took a breath, not deep, but enough. "And if they find out?" I asked. For the first time, I thought about that. He understood immediately. His expression changed, hardened. "If they're afraid of this, then that's already your answer." That hit me, because I knew they would be afraid. They had always been afraid of questions, of documents, of anything that proved existence. I reached out, paused midair, just a few centimeters away from touching it. But then, Emily, his voice, Thomas Caldwell, cold, low, right behind me. My entire body froze. I turned. He was standing there, no longer calm, no longer perfectly controlled. For the first time, his eyes didn't hold contempt. They held fear. He looked at Richard, then at me, then at the test in his hand. In 1 second, I understood everything. He knew, or at least, he suspected. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, but more dangerous than ever. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Richard straightened, didn't step back. "We're just talking," he said calmly. Thomas smiled. A smile that wasn't real. "She's our housekeeper. There's nothing to discuss privately." Richard didn't react, didn't argue, just looked straight at him. "I don't think so." The air between them tightened. Thomas stepped closer, slow, controlled. His hand rested on my shoulder, light, but firm enough to hold. "You should get back to work," he said, as if everything was normal, but his grip tightened. "I think this conversation is over." Richard didn't look away. "I don't." Again. His voice was calm, but this time, there was something else. His Zolvi. Thomas was silent for a few seconds. Then he turned to me. That look, a warning. Clear. If I did this, there would be no going back. No basement. No family. Nothing. I knew that, more clearly than ever. But for the first time, I realized something else. If I didn't do it, I would stay here forever. I looked down. The test was still there. One small movement. One decision. I looked up. At Thomas. Then at Richard. And then, I reached out. This time, I didn't stop. I took it. 3 days. 72 hours. That was the distance between me and the truth. But what I didn't know then was, the truth wouldn't just change me. It would destroy everything they had built for 23 years. I didn't know what I was hoping for during those 72 hours. Hope. Or denial. Maybe both. After taking the test, I didn't say another word. Richard left soon after, as if he understood that the longer he stayed, the more dangerous it would become. And me. I went back to the tray, kept walking, kept serving, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Not on the outside, but inside me. Every step felt heavier. Every glance around me became sharper. Every word started to carry meaning. I was no longer invisible. I started to see, and the first thing I saw was, they were watching me. Not openly, not directly, but clearly. When I passed their table, conversations stopped. When I turned Mrs. Caldwell's eyes shifted away too quickly. When I worked in the kitchen, the whispers were quieter than usual. Something was wrong, not because they knew, but because they were afraid. And that fear made them careless. That night when we returned home, everything was quieter than usual. No television, no voices, just footsteps and doors closing. I went down to the basement, sat on the edge of the bed, didn't turn on the light, did nothing, just sat there. 72 hours. 3 days. It sounded short. But when you're waiting for a truth that could destroy your entire life, every minute stretches endlessly. The next morning, Lima a.m. The alarm rang. I got up, went to the kitchen. Everything was the same, but it didn't feel the same. "Why is the coffee bitter today?" he asked. I stood still. I had made it exactly the same as always. Not a single mistake. "I'm sorry, sir." He said nothing more, but his eyes lingered longer than usual. 1 second. 2 seconds. Enough for me to understand. He was thinking, not about the coffee, but about me. Mrs. Caldwell, too. She started appearing in the kitchen more often, not speaking, just standing there, watching, as if she was searching for something, a mistake, a sign, anything that proved I had done something wrong. And the most terrifying part was, I didn't know what they suspected, or how much they knew. Day 2. Everything got worse. Daniel left early. Didn't say anything. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't look at me. But that silence was different. It wasn't indifference. It was avoidance. Like he had heard something, but didn't want to face it. In the afternoon, I was folding laundry when I heard his voice. "We need to be sure. Love. Urgent. No mistakes." "Mrs. Caldwell replied. Do you think she knows anything?" A pause. Lum. Then, "She doesn't know," he said, but his voice wasn't certain. I stood behind the door, not daring to breathe too loudly, not daring to move. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just afraid of punishment, I was afraid of the truth. Because if they were this afraid, then it meant there was something to be afraid of. The second night, I didn't sleep, not because of thoughts, but because of a feeling, like someone was standing outside the door, listening, waiting. I lay still, eyes open, staring into the dark, and for the first time, I realized the basement wasn't a shelter. It was a cage. Day 3. Everything became terrifyingly quiet. No one spoke. No one asked. No one looked at me for too long. But that normalcy was what scared me the most. Because it wasn't real. It felt like the moment before a storm. The air was silent, but heavy. I worked, cleaned, repeated, but my mind wasn't there anymore. I counted. Every hour, every minute, every second, until my phone vibrated. Ons, then stopped. I froze, didn't reach for it immediately, didn't look, but I knew there was only one person who could be calling me. I slipped my hand into my pocket, took out the phone, a message from an unknown number, short, clear. Results are in. My heart stopped, then started again. Faster, harder, more violently. Meet me tomorrow. 7 a.m. I stared at the screen. Didn't blink. 3 days. Over. The truth was right in front of me. But what I didn't know then was, when I walked out of that house tomorrow, I would never come back as the same person again. I left the house that morning, earlier than usual. No one asked. No one stopped me. It was just, the atmosphere inside the house felt different. Quiet. But not a normal kind of quiet. The kind of silence, where everyone is waiting for something to happen. I stepped outside. Didn't look back. Not because I was brave, but because, if I did, I might not be able to keep going. The walk to the cafe wasn't long, but that day, I walked slowly. Each step felt like I was moving closer to a different version of myself. Aversión. I didn't know if I could accept. Richard was already there when I arrived. Sitting in the corner, in front of him was an envelope, thick, placed neatly on the table. He didn't smile when he saw me. No small talk. Just looked at me. Serious. You came. I nodded. Sat down. Didn't ask anything right away. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I was afraid of the answer. The envelope sat between us, less than a meter apart, but it felt like a cliff. If you want, you can open it, he said, calm voice. But his hands weren't completely steady. I looked at the envelope, didn't touch it, not immediately. I knew, once I opened it, everything would change. No going back. No pretending. No continuing the life I had before. I need you to understand something, Richard continued. If this result is correct, he paused, then the people you call family are not your family? The air grew heavier. I swallowed. And worse, his voice dropped. There's a chance they knew from the beginning. That hit me, not like a shock, but like a missing piece, finally falling into place. I thought about his eyes. Thomas. That day, for the first time, I had seen fear in him. If he had done nothing wrong, why would he be afraid? I reached out. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the envelope. Papers. More than I expected. Numbers. Terms I didn't understand. But then, one line stood out. I read it. Aunts. Didn't fully understand. I read it again. Slower. 99. 97% probability. Biological daughter. Margaret Whitmore. I stopped. Didn't read further. I didn't need to. My heart pounded. Uneven. Out of control. What does that mean? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Richard didn't answer immediately. He looked at me. Then said, "It means, you are my sister's daughter." A pause. And you were taken. No sound existed for the next few seconds. No cars. No voices. Nothing. Just those words. Repeating. Inside my head. Taken. 2 words. But they shattered. 23 years. I shook my head. Not hard. But enough. No. Not denying him. But denying the possibility. Because if that was true, then everything I had lived was not my life. It was a mistake. A crime. Richard pulled out a photo. Old. Faded. But clear. A woman. Blue eyes. Dark hair. Like me. Not slightly. But almost identical. In her arms. A baby. Your name, Richard said, is not Emily. I didn't speak. Your real name is. He looked at me. Brianna Whitmore. That name didn't feel foreign. It didn't feel new. It felt familiar. Like I had heard it before, but didn't know where. 23 years ago, he continued. My sister gave birth to a baby girl. A few months later, the baby disappeared from the hospital. I tightened my grip on the paper. No one found her. No trace. No answers. His voice slowed. Until I saw you, I looked at him. No more doubt. Only fear. Not fear of him, but fear of myself. Fear that I had never been who I thought I was. Then who are they? I asked. A simple question. But the answer wasn't simple. Richard didn't respond immediately, but his eyes told me enough. If they're not your family, then what are they? A long silence. Heavy. Then, the people who kept you. He didn't need to say more. I understood. Not raised. Not saved. But kept. Kept me. Inside a life that was never mine. I sat there. Didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't react. Because everything was too much. Too big. Too fast. But one thing was clear. I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't continue living the same life. And that meant I would have to face them. Not like before. Not as the help, but as someone who knew the truth. And what I didn't know then was they had already started preparing too. I didn't go home right away. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because, for the first time in my life, I had a choice. I stayed in that cafe for almost an hour. Didn't talk much. Didn't ask much. Just listened. Richard didn't push me. He only gave me information, piece by piece. Enough for me to understand, but not so much that I would completely fall apart. There had been an investigation. An old file. A disappearance. Never solved. And now, I was no longer part of that story. I was the answer. What you do next is your decision, Richard said, his voice calm. No pressure. You can walk away. Start over. No one is forcing you to confront them. I looked at him. For the first time, I truly considered it. Leave. Disappear. Never go back. No confrontation. No explanations. No revenge. Just live. A different life. A real life. But then, I remembered. The basement. The thin mattress. The 5 a.m. mornings. The cane. The leftover meals. And their eyes, when they looked at me like I wasn't human. 23 years. Not just a mistake, but a life that had been stolen. I took a breath. Not deep, but enough. I don't want to leave, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Richard didn't look surprised. He simply nodded. Then we need to do this the right way. He placed another file on the table. Not the DNA results, but a plan. They won't admit anything unless they're forced, and we need evidence. I looked at the pages. Not everything was clear, but I understood the idea. A meeting. Attrape. An opportunity for them to expose themselves. You want me to go back there? I asked. Richard looked at me. For a long moment. You don't have to go back. You choose to go back. That difference was small, but it changed everything. I was no longer someone being kept. I was someone Walking in by choice, I stood up, still holding the results, not because I needed them, but because I needed to remember. To remember that I wasn't the same person anymore. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, not because of the weather, but because of me. Nothing around me had changed, but the way I saw it had. I no longer saw that house as the only place I could exist, but as the place I had been kept, and now I was going back, not to live, but to end it. If you were me, what would you do? Leave and start over. Go back and face them. Comment un hors deux? Because sometimes the hardest choice is the one you have to make. When I walked into the house, everything looked the same. The same. To the point. It no longer felt real. Mrs. Caldwell was sitting in the living room, a magazine in her hands. But she wasn't reading, just turning pages. Slowly, unfocused. He stood by the window, not reading the newspaper, not doing anything, just standing there, looking outside. But I knew he was waiting, waiting for me. Why were you gone so long? Her voice came, soft, but no longer fake. I walked in, set my bag down. I went to get something. I said, simple, no explanation. A pause. They looked at me. Both of them. No more hiding. No more pretending. Just watching, as if trying to read my thoughts. Did you meet anyone? He asked. Calm voice. But his eyes weren't calm. I shook my head. No. One word. Short. Clear. But for the first time, I lied to them without feeling afraid. There was only something else. Control. Something I had never had before. Mrs. Caldwell stood up, walked toward me. Too close. Emily. Her voice dropped. You know what happens when you lie, don't you? Before, that sentence was enough to make me shake, enough to make me apologize, enough to make me stay silent. But this time, I just looked at her, didn't step back, didn't avoid, didn't fear. I'm not lying. I said, no, yes, Mum. No politeness. Just words. For the first time, both of them went still. Not because they believed me, but because they realized I had changed. And that made them afraid. Not because they had lost control completely, but because they were starting to. I turned away, walked down to the basement, but this time, it felt different. It was no longer where I was trapped. It was where I was preparing to leave for good. And what they didn't know was, in the next few days, everything they had hidden for 23 years would be dragged into the light. Not by me, but by themselves. 1 week later, everything was ready. Not by me, but by people who knew exactly how to make the truth undeniable. Richard sent the invitation. A formal meeting. Private. At his estate in Greenwich. The reason was simple. A business opportunity. That alone was enough for them to accept. I didn't need to convince them. Didn't need to say anything. They came on their own. As if walking straight into what they had avoided for 23 years. That morning, no one spoke much in the car. He drove. She sat beside him. I sat in the back, silent. The air was tense, but no one dared to name it. Do you remember what you're supposed to do? Mrs. Caldwell asked. Without turning around, I remember, I answered, "No more yes, ma'am. No more submission." She didn't react, but her shoulders stiffened. That was enough. They knew. Not everything, but enough to be afraid. When the car stopped in front of the estate, he let out a low whistle. At least 30 million. His voice carried that familiar ambition, as if everything was still under control. As if he didn't realize he had already lost before walking in. We were led into a large living room, high ceilings, natural light. Everything, flawless. Richard stood there, waiting. No smile. No small talk. Just watching. I stood behind. Didn't step forward. Didn't need to. My position no longer mattered. My role did. "Thank you for coming," Richard said, calm, but not friendly. "Before we discuss business," he paused, "I'd like to talk about someone." He looked at me. Direct. No hesitation. "Emily." The room froze. He turned to Thomas. "You said she's your daughter, correct?" "A simple question." Thomas smiled. "Instinct." "Of course. We've raised her since she was a child." Richard nodded. Slowly, I checked. A pause. "There are no adoption records." Thomas's smile disappeared. In a second, perhaps the paperwork was lost. "There's no birth certificate." Richard cut in. "No social security number. No legal documentation at all." His voice stayed calm, but each sentence cut deeper. "Mrs. Caldwell set her teacup down. Her hand trembled slightly. "What are you implying?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He opened a folder, placed it on the table. 2 documents. One new. One old. The first, he pointed. "Isa DNA result." I didn't look. I already knew. 99, 97. She is my sister's daughter. No one spoke. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. "The second," he continued, "is an FBI report from 2003. He looked straight at Thomas. "A newborn kidnapping. Stanford Hospital. Perpetrator unknown." A long silence. Heavy. Then, until now, the air broke. "This is a misunderstanding." Thomas started, but his voice was no longer steady, no longer controlled. "Then explain," Richard said, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "Explain why she has no identity. Explain why she looks exactly like my sister. Explain why you're afraid." That last word hit. Thomas stood up. "You have no right." The door behind us opened. No one turned immediately, but everyone heard it. Footsteps. Multiple. Synchronized. "Certain. I think we do." A new voice. Cold. Clear. 2 men walked in. Gray suits. Badges. FB. Everything after that happened fast. Thomas stepped back. "Mrs. Caldwell jumped to her feet. "What is this?" Her voice cracked. "Esther. Thomas Caldwell. Mrs. Linda Caldwell. We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of human trafficking, document fraud, and child abuse." Each word, a sentence. Thomas tried to resist. Just one step. Then he was restrained. No longer the man in control, just someone losing everything. Mrs. Caldwell turned to me. For the first time, she truly looked at me, not as help, not as a shadow, but as a person. Emily, please. Her voice shook. Say something. I stood there, didn't move closer, didn't step away, just looked at her. 23 years. All I had ever wanted was a look like that. But now, it meant nothing. You never treated me like a daughter. I said, calm, steady. So don't call me that. The handcuffs clicked. A small sound, but enough. An ending. They were led away. No turning back. No more words. No control. No answers. Only consequences. The room fell silent. But not like before. This time, it wasn't fear. It was the silence after everything ends. I stood there, didn't move, didn't speak, didn't think, just felt something strange. Not happiness, not relief, but emptiness. Because when one life ends, you don't immediately have a new one. There's only space. And what I didn't know then was that space would be where I had to learn how to become myself again. After that day, nothing ended. It began. No more sound of his footsteps in the house. No more her voice calling me from the living room. No more rules taped to the basement door. But that didn't mean everything disappeared right away. It left echoes everywhere. In every corner of the house, in every habit, in every reflex I couldn't erase. In those first days, I still woke up at 5 a.m. No alarm needed. My body just did it. I walked into the kitchen, stood there for a few seconds, not knowing what to do, no one to serve, no orders, no tasks, just silence. A kind of silence I had never learned how to face. That house was no longer a home. It was an empty place, a place that had held me, and now no one was there. The property was sealed. Police came and went. Strangers moved through the rooms. Everything was taken down, recorded, stamped, locked away, as if those 23 years were just a case, a file, a number. But for me, it was an entire life. The trial happened a few months later. I didn't want to go, but I had to. Not to see them, but to finish it. Thomas Caldwell no longer looked like the man I had known. No tailored suit, no controlled expression, just someone trying to hold on to what little image he had left. Mrs. Caldwell was different. She cried. A lot. But not the kind of crying that makes people forgive you. The kind that comes when you know it's too late. They didn't look at me much. They couldn't. Not because they were ashamed, but because, for the first time, they had no power. The court didn't care what they thought, only what they had done. The evidence was clear. Records, testimonies, and me. When I stood to testify, the entire room went silent, not because I spoke loudly, but because everything I said was clear. No drama, no exaggeration, just the truth. And the truth is always enough. Thomas received a longer sentence. Mrs. Caldwell received less, not because she was less guilty, but because she talked more, blamed, explained, defended, but no one believed her. No one did anymore. The house was seized, assets frozen, their names disappeared from the circles they once tried to belong to. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, had to face consequences. No job, no position, no connections. Everything he had was never truly his. And when that foundation disappeared, so did he. He called me. Once, I didn't want to answer, but I did. Emily, he still used that name, as if nothing had changed. I need help. His voice wasn't steady anymore. No confidence, just emptiness. I stayed silent, waited. I've lost everything. I have nothing left. I need some money, just temporary. A long pause, heavy. I thought about every time he had called me before. Not to talk, but to demand. Not to ask, but to order. I need coffee. I need my room cleaned. I need the car washed. Not once. I need you. I took a breath. Have you ever helped me? I asked. Silence. Have you ever asked how I lived? No answer. You knew. I continued. You just didn't care. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. I won't help you. I said, no anga. No hatred. Just clarity. Then I hung up. For the first time, I set a boundary and kept it. Not out of revenge, but because I wasn't the same person anymore. But freedom wasn't what I expected. It wasn't immediate relief, not happiness, not a perfect ending. It was a void, a very large one. Because when you lose a life, even a bad one, you still lose it. And you have to learn how to build again. From nothing, I moved in with Richard. A room with a window, real light, real air. A soft bed. Too soft. I wasn't used to it. The first few nights, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know where I was. No footsteps, no voices, no tasks. Just me, and that was harder than I expected. But slowly, I began to understand freedom isn't about having nothing. It's about having the right to choose. And I was learning how to choose. But what I didn't know then was this new life wasn't just about freedom. It was about answering the biggest question of all. Who am I? When I'm no longer Emily. 3 months after the trial, I received an envelope. Not like the one before. Not heavy. Not frightening. But, more important, the name on it was not Emily Caldwell. It was Brianna Whitmore. I stared at that name for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I was learning how to accept it. 23 years. I lived with a name that wasn't mine. A role that wasn't mine. A life written by someone else. And now that I had my real name back, I didn't know how to feel. Proud. Strange. Or lost. I opened the envelope. Inside were documents. Official. Legal. Undeniable. A birth certificate. Date of birth. Place of birth. Mother's name. Margaret Whitmore. I touched the line with her name. Gently, as if it might disappear if I pressed too hard. This was the first time I had seen her name. Not through stories. Not through guesses. But the truth. A truth that had been taken from me. For 23 years, Richard stood behind me. Didn't speak. He understood. Some moments don't need words. She looked for me, didn't she? I asked, without turning, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Until her last day." One answer, short, but enough. I closed my eyes. Didn't cry. Not the way I thought I would. It was more like something heavy, finally being set down. A part of me finally knew. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't worthless. I wasn't born to serve. I was taken, and someone never stopped searching for me. That night, I sat alone in my room. A new room, window open, soft wind, no damp smell, no concrete ceiling, no basement, just me. On the table were two things: the birth certificate and a letter. Richard had given it to me that afternoon. She wrote this before everything happened. I opened it. Old paper, soft handwriting, slightly trembling. My daughter, if one day you read this, I want you to know you are the most wonderful thing that ever happened in my life. From the moment you were born, I knew you were not ordinary, not because you were perfect, but because there was something special about you. If one day you feel lost, like you don't belong anywhere, remember, you always belong to the love I have for you. No one can take that away. No matter what happens, leave. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because you deserve to. I finished reading, didn't fold it right away, just placed my hand over the page. For the first time in my life, I felt loved, not through words, not through actions, but as a truth, something that couldn't be changed. In the days that followed, I began to learn everything again, things other people consider normal. Reading, writing, learning, communicating, choosing. Choosing what to eat, what to wear, when to sleep, when to wake up. Small things. But to me, an entire world. I applied to a program, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to. I didn't know what the future would look like, didn't know who I would become, but for the first time, I had the right to decide that. One morning, I woke up, Lima A.M., like always, habit. My body still remembered, but this time, I didn't get up right away. I lay there, watching the light come through the window, and I asked myself, if today I don't have to serve anyone, what will I do? That question no longer scared me. It made me curious. I got up, walked into the kitchen, not to cook for someone else, but to make coffee for myself. I sat down at the table, alone, but not lonely. I took a sip, closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living someone else's life. I was no longer Emily. I wasn't fully Brianna yet, but I was becoming myself, and that was enough.